Chapter 8. Godzilla groaned as he rose to his full height. The alpha predator had underestimated the strength of his tiny attacker. He would not do so again. He turned around to face his foe, and was utterly baffled by the sight of it flying away. He was so confused by the sight that he almost didn't feel something coiling around his leg. He looked down to see the small green Godzilla wrapping its tails around his foot and pulling with all of its strength. He felt the tug, but refused to fall. He kicked his leg forward, dragging the smaller kaiju with it until it fell over. He moved forward and raised his foot to crush it, but almost immediately pulled back with a groan of pain. Purple spines were now stained red with blood where they had impaled the bottom of the giant's foot. They flared orange, burning off the blood, and the small king fired its atomic ray at him, a beam that struck the elder with surprising force. He took a step back, and then his own spines began to glow. Blue lights starting at the tip of his tail and flowing up towards his head until he could retaliate it. Where most Gojirahs fired a concentrated laser, the naturally evolved Godzilla's breath was more like fire. And like fire, it flowed all around his victim. It screamed in pain as the flames engulfed it, searing its flesh. The old predator paused to take a breath when he was struck by yet another beam. This one blue, and from further away. The glow around his spikes faded, and he glared at his new attacker, the scarred king that he had punted away earlier. He did not know how it was possible, but the Permian king realized that these tiny terrors had greater nuclear power than he did, which meant he had only one advantage, albeit one big advantage. He charged forward at full speed, apparently startling both his victims with the ground he could cover. The green one leaped again, but this time to get out of the way. The old predator would hunt it down later, and he continued to barrel down on the scarred one. A blue blast of nuclear energy slowed him down, but could not stop him. And when he reached his victim, he bent down and used an enormous claw to knock it over. He then picked it up by the tail. Dangling upside down, the smaller Godzilla thrashed as much as it could, scratching and biting at the enormous elder's armored hide and bombarding it with atomic rays in an effort to make it to release him. The elder was not even attacking him, seemingly doing this purely to humiliate him. The old predator lacked the sadistic streak required to appreciate humiliation. Godzilla was not attacking the prey because he was studying it for where exactly to strike a killing blow. The back was covered by sharp silver spikes, and removing the tail, though potentially crippling, was non-lethal. Biting off the head could work, but would leave him vulnerable to the mutant firing its weapons down his own throat, so it was not an option. That left the prey's torso as his only real target. The scar in particular was likely the most vulnerable. With that thought, he dropped the prey on its head, stunning it, then kicked it over so that it was on its side, and the spikes faced away from him. As he reached down again, the semi-conscious prey stirred weakly, calling out defiantly and making slow attempts to keep his claws away. It was to no avail. The elder immobilized the creature's arm, and then began biting at the scarred chest, ripping and tearing savagely, ripping out scales and scarred tissue, and spilling radioactive blood. The small mutant thrashed and shrieked in agony, and fired its atomic ray at his face this time. It struck him between the eyes and dazed him, but he retaliated by tightening his grip on both of his victim's arm and pulling. There was a loud, disgusting popping noise as the arms dislocated, drowned out only by the prey's scream of pain. The elder continued to maul the small Godzilla's torso until he could finally see its ribs. Then he charged his own atomic breath and fired into the injury. With a last wail, the mutant expired, its insides roasted by the alpha predator, flames that were not its own emerging from its mouth. The elder stood up from the burning corpse and roared in victory once again. He scanned the area for more prey. Behind him, the green Godzilla awaited its fate. Somewhere off to his left, the one that reeked of death lay near the corpse of his titanic rival, still trying to recover from the strike of his tail. And somewhere near the horizon, the small one that had surprising strength was investigating another corpse, perhaps looking for energy to absorb. The predator opted for the one closest to him. He turned and roared at the short green Godzilla, which roared back, seemingly unafraid, even after witnessing the brutal death of one so like it. The possessed king rose to his feet, struggling to simply draw a breath. He was certain that the strike of the titan's mammoth tail had driven one of his ribs into one of his lungs, and now mere movement was a struggle. He used the nearby corpse to steady himself. The souls that drove him were troubled. What good was a broken vessel? Regardless, they were committed to the plan and their vengeance. Tokyo was gone, and soon all of Japan would follow. He took one painful step after another until he heard a familiar sound. He looked up and saw the champion flying towards him. He charged his atomic ray, inhaling radioactive particles from the atmosphere, and prepared to shoot him out of the sky. But with his injury, he was not able to turn as quickly and wound up, simply raking the landscape behind him. Or was it in front of him, given that he was flying backwards? And the titanic corpse he landed behind. He snarled and chose to wait for the old king to come to him. As predicted, his rival appeared, stepping around the dead king's maimed head. He roared a challenge, and the champion answered, both with a roar and by brandishing a pair of swords. As the defender charged him, the demon got a closer look. The old king's hands were bleeding, and he was holding long, snapped-off fragments of Godzilla 2000 spikes, dual-wielding them like some kind of berserker. Godzilla slashed the abomination, remembering how easily the other Godzilla spines had sliced through its thick hide, and true enough, the makeshift violet blades were ripping through his foes with ease. The demon screeched in pain and rage and charged up its atomic ray once more, only to be stabbed in the heart with one spike and in the neck with the other. Godzilla roared, satisfied that he had already won, but the demon grasped him with its claws and refused to let go. The souls remembered what had happened the last time their body had been pierced, and now it had happened again. But this time, they would take their attacker with them. The demon attempted to fire his atomic ray and exploded while keeping his rival at point blank. Moments later, the dust settled and Godzilla stood up shakily. The explosion had been powerful, no doubt, one of the strongest he had ever endured, and strong enough, at least, to reopen a number of wounds that he had thought had fully regenerated. But he paid them no mind. He was alive, and his foe was dead. It was time to face the Leviathan. But something stirred behind him. At first, he thought it was just rubble sent up by the explosion falling back down. But then, it happened again and again, prompting him to look. What he saw stunned him. The Colossus corpse was moving, its claws scraping against the ground, its tail twitching slightly, and its spines were flashing as they appeared to be absorbing the radiation from his enemy's detonation and drawing more irradiated lightning from the storm. But most shocking of all was its head's wound. The bone shards were snapping back into place, and flesh and scales were knitting themselves back together over them. Godzilla backed away. He feared nothing, but even he found himself disturbed by the sight of another, larger Godzilla coming back to life. Another minute later, the Titan's eyes opened, and the monster rose again with a powerful roar announcing his return. The newly resurrected mutant barely even glanced at the smaller Godzilla before catching sight of the Permian predator. Enraged by the sight of his killer, the restored Godzilla roared and even louder and marched off, determined to wreak terrible revenge upon him. The Alpha Predator had just endured another blast from his small foe when they both heard the powerful roar. The Elder's eyes widened in shock and horror. He had killed the mutant, crushed its skulls and brain in his jaws. It could not possibly be alive. Yet, there it was, walking towards him, as if it considered his death inevitable. The Permian Godzilla roared a challenge, for the first time in eons, uncertain if he would be victorious. The vanquisher of Godzilla 2000 was just beginning to wonder what to do in the face of two such titans, when he was struck in the side by an atomic ray. He turned to see the old champion challenging him. And so, the stage was set for two more deals.